So Michael Dick,
Michael Dick is here.
Susan? Susan, you're on mute.
Susan Franklin here.
Ralph
Ralph Dormitzer here.
and Brian Host present. So we've got a quorum. First item of today,
Sorry about that.
no problem. Was that a dog or a chicken? Sorry, it was an attempt at humor. First item of business today is Fields and Courts. And with us is our honorary guest, Michelle Leary.
Okay, so I'm pulling up the presentation and I'll share my screen. As long as I can pull it up. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that?
Ken,
Ken?
Yes.
Okay, so tonight I don't expect any votes to be taken or anything. I just wanted to socialize the idea of one of the select board goals for FY23 was part of the field study. We began studying fields and courts in town in 2021. We were allocated funding to do such of a study, which included a master plan, if you will, of all the fields and courts in town. What came out of our study for fields and courts in town was, we really were deficient in multi-purpose fields. And that's primarily because our fields are grass fields, and we only have that one turf location. All of the youth groups were involved in this study, and they submitted hours of use to our consultant. The consultant compiled all of the information and came up with our deficiencies, and that is how we came up with a phased project for fields and courts. So we're focusing on a phase 1 study, and phase 1 incorporates many items that were highlighted as I would say as major deficiencies in town. So one would be to renovate tennis courts. We've been talking about the Bancroft tennis courts for a number of years now. And obviously that was the number one thing that was highlighted in our field study. The fields are in desperate need of renovation. There is a retaining wall there that needs reconstruction. And when we were discussing this, we also discussed the need in town for some pickleball courts. And the thought process here was, if we were going to renovate an entire recreational facility, which would be the tennis courts, it would be a lot less costly to then add pickleball courts at the same time. You're not mobilizing equipment. You're not doing all that earthwork twice. So that's the thought process here. And pickleball courts, they seem to be an all-age activity, so it was adding another recreational activity for the community. Originally, we thought about lighting these courts because at one time the tennis courts did have lights. They've since been taken down. So the thought process here was, maybe we don't put lights up now. Let's get the courts done. Let's get them light ready, but not actually put the lights up unless there's a need. The reason for actually getting them ready for lighting is you don't want to ruin any of the work that has already been done. Because anytime you do that, you undermine the surface. These are for post-concrete tension tennis courts. That is what's been recommended. They're also going to look at drainage and stormwater management. And then we have your construction, contingency, and soft cost at 35%. And the reason for that is we don't have any hard bid numbers yet. We don't have any design or engineering at this point in time. So that is the number. I can share with you that Hingham just put out to bid 1 pickleball court and 6 tennis courts. And the bid came in at about $860,000. So it's where we expected it to be. And I think when we see pricing, they're actually seeing pricing coming down a bit, whereas in the past, the pricing has escalated. And then, so the second part of the project would be Dare Hill improvements. We're looking at, obviously, natural grass is the least costly option here. Of course, turf would be wonderful, but it's costly. Our summer camp utilizes this area, so a turf is not recommended by our recreation department because it's too hot. And the kids often sit on it for their activities, they play on it, and the fear is that it would be too hot and you'd need a water management system to keep the heat down. There's no home right now for youth lacrosse. Currently, the Dare Hill field is not regulation sized. Therefore, they cannot have games there, so they're scheduling on Milliken with soccer and all in baseball. And there's conflicts and it's overuse. So what we want to get away from is really using Milliken Field as much as we have been, because the overuse wears out the field. And if we want to keep the town with natural grass fields, we really need to maintain them and make sure that they're not overused, because that's what wears them out. So the Dare Hill will include a natural grass renovation for a regulation size lacrosse field. They will renovate the softball diamond. It has recently been done, so it's minimal work there, and earthwork. And the estimate there is about $660,000. We are requesting lighting at this athletic field. It allows for longer play times and it allows for longer use periods of the field. The lighting is coming in at $475,000. We're requesting a lacrosse wall. So the story behind the lacrosse wall is, at first, the youth lacrosse organization went before recreation and asked if it could be placed at Sawyer Street. While they took that under advisement and approved it pending further study, if we are to put it here at Dare Hill, that $115,000 would come down slightly. It may not be the ideal location for the lacrosse wall, and the youth organization can speak more about that. But we are recommending that whether it go at Dare Hill or Sawyer Street, that a lacrosse wall is also needed as part of this phase 1. This includes fencing, and again, that construction contingency soft cost for almost $1.8 million. So that is phase 1 of this entire renovation. And then you get into phase 2, which is a huge number. And that is only because we're talking about turf. So we're talking about maximizing Milliken Field and making that a turf field, so you don't have to worry about overuse any longer. It will also include a nice walking path around the perimeter. It will have outdoor exercise equipment for everyone to use. As you may or may not know, the Milliken Field concession stand is finally being outfitted with bathrooms. So there's going to be 3 ADA accessible bathrooms within that structure. And then they're proposing parking. Parking obviously has to go before the neighborhood. We have to find the best place to put it. There's some considerations for, stormwater runoff, and those are some things that we'll have to address, but this is phase 2. All we're asking for is approval on phase 1, or a recommendation on phase 1, to get the community the pickleball courts, tennis courts, and a regulation size field for lacrosse, as well as lacrosse wall. So that is it in a nutshell. I will stop sharing.
Okay, actually, if you could go back to the share, I think that'd be
Yeah, sure.
at least that maybe others agree or disagree, but what I'd like to suggest is maybe we go through each of these phases
Sure.
Now that we've heard sort of the package and, perhaps by looking at each slide, it'll trigger questions and comments and also structure the conversation a little bit more of a streamlined manner. So I'd like to suggest that.
I'd like to jump in here for a second, Brian. Since we have limited time,
Yes.
I would recommend just discussing phase one. And then scheduling phase two for another time.
Let me ask a question. I don't disagree with you based on the agenda that's up, which shows 30 minutes for this. But let me ask Michelle just quickly. Michelle, are we going to be speaking about Beechwood today or are we not?
We can speak to it at a high level. I will have more information next week on it. So I don't want to bog you down with something that I don't have a ton of information on yet.
Okay, so okay. That's
So
kind
the answer is we can wait until next week on
how much
Beechwood.
time if we budgeted any time to Beechwood tonight, how much would be constructive versus should we just be doing this at a future meeting because we're not ready at this time?
I think we should do it at a future meeting. It would take 5 minutes just for me to high level tell you what the next steps are.
Okay, we should probably do that, but let's try to get, as much as we can done on this today, given that we actually have this in front of us. And
Sure.
Brian, having said that, I see we have a question from an anonymous attendee asking about the parts of phase two. So whoever that is, we should at least let them know that their question will come up when we get to phase two.
makes sense. Great. Let's start with phase one and work from there. Would anyone like to lead off with questions or comments?
Well, I guess my primary questions about the two phases is there any duplicity in cost between doing this in two phases versus one?
There isn't because they're two separate facilities. So we're looking here at Deer Hill and Bancroft. So what we would do here at the Bancroft courts wouldn't impact what we would then do in the future on the field level at Milliken.
And one other question, Michelle, was there's lots of talk about the tennis courts being lower than the field and issues with water and cracking and things like that. And it looks like we're going to continue to keep them down lower than the field. How are we addressing those concerns?
Yeah, we are. And that's a great question. And it came up a lot during our public forums. It would be addressed with better drainage, a better drainage management system. And that is a concern for the abutters as well, as if we were to put parking in and we'd have to clear cut some area, then where would the drainage go? So that is part of the design and engineering package to make sure that the courts that we put in stay for 30 years.
Conceptually, before you set the engineers loose, conceptually, based on sort of the contours, which way, are people thinking it would drain? Would they drain it to the left and bring it into that stream fundamentally?
They would. That's the thought process anyhow.
Okay, and the natural contour is at least close to moving in that direction from the height of the courts. Okay. But right now, the natural contour is off the right-hand side. It spills, well, it's actually the top on the right? It spills off the top down the hill that way and then turns right and goes down into the brook that runs through town, I'm guessing.
And a lot of it, Brian, is the retaining wall there.
Yep.
Is not necessarily doing the job to the best of its ability because it does need to be reconstructed.
And is that the retaining wall above or below the courts? Because this is cut and fill, so there's probably two. I haven't looked closely, but there's probably two retaining walls, right? One above holding the fields and then one below holding the courts.
Exactly right.
And is this a replacement of both of all of those retaining walls?
It's a replacement of the one above. In the one below, they don't believe needs to be fully replaced. Upon initial review, I should say.
Okay, so our courts aren't like sliding down the hill.
No, they're not.
They're just cracking because they're getting water from the playing fields coming down under them and undermining them in certain places.
Yes.
Okay. If I noticed that the location of the tennis courts moves, right? It moves further away from the roads and opens up space for those pickleball courts closer to Bancroft. Are we reusing the lower retaining wall? Or do we have to fundamentally redo it? Because we're certainly gonna have to lengthen it based on the looks of this.
It does, it has to be extended,
Yeah.
but we can, upon initial review, utilize some of what is there.
Okay. Okay, so back in those back two courts, the furthest two courts, those are new retaining walls above and below. Is that fair? Because there's no.
That is a fair statement.
Okay, and it looks like this parking on the along the courts there with a road that leads somewhere. Where's the thought that road would?
Yeah, so
Civilization.
that's part of phase two.
Okay.
At this present time, they put a roadway in there. They've played with roadways several places around the perimeter. And that one seemed to be the most easily accessible, should I say. But once again, this hasn't been vetted by any of the neighbors. So I don't know that it's even fair to really talk about, because if anyone's watching this, they're probably blindsided thinking they're gonna have a parking lot in their neighborhood.
Okay.
We've primarily focused on phase one, and the parking would be phase two.
Okay. There aren't really homes back there, are there?
No, there are. There are homes that are about that area. It's Norfolk Lane and
I think that's homes on Pleasant Street that are backing up to the course over there.
That's right.
Okay. And they actually back right up to them, or is there woods in between?
Not a lot.
Okay.
Was there any discussion of putting the parking lot on along the field side and not the tennis court side, where you do have more of a buffer?
so there are currently spots there. There's 45 spots along the field now.
Yeah, I meant the opposite side. That's woods right now.
So that's difficult because there is a topographical drop off there. It would require a tremendous amount of fill. It's something we can look at, but I don't know if it would be. It might be cost prohibitive to do.
Okay. So the 1875, I'm just adding this up in my head, includes the lighting, but the lighting stripped back out. So is that right? So this is 1.4.
Yes. Yep.
Wait a minute, that can't be right.
8.
Now it's actually 1876, including the
Yeah, with the
contingency.
35% contingency.
Yeah. So it's fundamentally 1A to rebuild the courts and rebuild 5 of the 6 courts and then lose 1 and pick up 5 pickleball courts.
And it can be any configuration, and that is a question we've been asked several times.
Right.
You know, can we still maintain 6 tennis courts and maybe 4 pickleball courts? And the answer is yes. Yes, we can. It can be any configuration. We would obviously have to figure that out before bidding, but that is the area that we'd have to configure it within.
Right. Okay. And do we know the status of the pickleball potential plans for the senior center? there was some talk about putting in pickleball courts there between the senior center and the embankment leading up to the pool.
Yeah, so the last I heard about that was there would have to be some easements, some land easements from the property owners abutting that. So I don't know that it's as simple as once thought. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that is something that would be paid for by the Social Service League and the swim center together. It hasn't gained much traction from what I know. And I'm not sure if anyone's on the call that can answer that. I don't know if anyone from Recreation's here that knows more. But that was the last I heard.
Okay, and the easements that would need to be signed, it would be with the swim trust or whatever it's.
It would actually be with the homeowners that abut that area because they would need to take some of the land. So they'd have enough space, is the way I understand it.
Okay, I'm not fully sure I understand it, but so for that to be the case, it would have to be, on the street side of the parking lot, right? Backing up onto those homes, is that
Yes,
contemplated? Okay.
yes, yep.
Okay, I misunderstood. For some reason, I thought that there was space actually between the senior center building and the embankment actually leading up to the pool to slot them there end to end.
So that's where they have their bocce courts.
Okay, got it. Okay, so they're looking at the other side of the parking lot.
Yes,
Okay. And the pool trust doesn't have enough land, so they'd have to either buy or lease or get easements from the landowners to get enough space. Okay. Anyone else questions on this phase? I mean, I have one more question, but I don't want to.
Well, let me-
I have several, but go ahead, Ralph.
Okay, a few things. First, how would this get paid for, I guess, is the number one.
right. So the number one question. So, I mean, in all honesty, I think the select board is going to have to make a decision of how much they're going to ask the town to fund versus how much CPC is willing to fund. We have an application in with CPC, and we do have to refine that a bit before they will hear it. So it would be whatever the town is willing to fund minus CPC.
Okay. The other thing is, I don't know how familiar you all are with pickleball and what is actually being done in many places. But I play tennis at the Y in Hanover, and what they have done is they have taken one or two tennis courts, and they have many tennis courts. There are 10 clay, and there's probably another 8 hard courts there indoors. And they actually are able to convert on a temporary basis tennis courts into pickleball courts. And the demand is moderate. It's nowhere near the demand there is for tennis. So if you use that as a gauge, and I can't say it's true for Cohasset, but broadly, pickleball is something you do when you can't play tennis for most people, okay? At least those who play tennis, right? And although it's catching on as a sport, most people are now simply just using a portion of the tennis courts, and then you get 2 pickleball courts per tennis court. That's what you get, which you should actually consider. Although I don't know whether people understand how that looks, but I've seen that at the Y. They have that every day. They've got that going down there. The second thing with regard to where you place pickleball courts is that pickleball is a noisy sport as compared to tennis. The sound of the racket against the ball is quite loud. It's not a soft sound. And as a result, it is a high annoyance sport for most people for whom it would be near their homes. So when you talk about even anywhere near a home associated with the pool itself or near the senior center, you're talking about a noisy sport that really I think people would have a lot of objection to. Now, the Bancroft courts is a very different question, but you've got tennis there already and a lot of other sports, so maybe it's not as big an annoyance, but it is a very annoying sport to listen to. And you would not like it if you lived anywhere near it, I can tell you. Anyhow, broad thoughts, there are other ways to get pickleball courts. You really ought to look at demand. I don't see the demand among a very avid group of players at the Y, and there are a lot of players down there every single day. And pickleball is probably, I don't know, you might argue that it's 15, 20% of the actual population who play. So it's not a big sport yet by any manner of means, and people ought to be aware of that. So you got to ask, why do you do this? Or why don't you just convert or go 6 tennis courts and convert 1 on occasion to pickleball courts? Anyway, there are other ways to look at this than others are doing it other ways. Anyway, those are my only thoughts.
Michael, you had some questions?
Yeah, I have several. I noticed that there is a question that came up from an anonymous attendee who asked the same question that Ralph pointed out. We should make sure that gets into our minutes. Has anyone evaluated the noise for 4 pickleball courts? Anyway, my major concern right now is the cost of these projects coming in at a time when we have 2 or 3 other major projects in front of us. And I would hope that we can scale all of these projects back and down to what I think of as the minimum viable design, rather than larger scale designs with lots of features. What can be done to try and get as much of these requests in within an unknown means of financing? So the questions I think of are, how many people will use these facilities over what time period? Can we redesign these to have fewer facilities because we can't afford more? Then I also think about other town space that might be possible. For example, in the rear of the Pratt Library, adjacent to the basketball court, that's, in my view, open space. Or perhaps across North Main Street from the ball fields on the front field at Wheelwright Park, where the pumpkin patch is normally kept, but there's space there with parking. So it seems like there's a lot more thought that could and should go into these proposals before they're ready for prime time. Moving to, well, if we're ready to talk about the lacrosse fields and lacrosse walls, I've got questions there.
Let's hold until we get to the second page of phase 1.
Right, and then there's a third question now on our Q&A asking, are we going to discuss parking? So the answer, I think, is yes to the person that asked, but just want to make sure that we get that onto the minutes too, into the recording.
Okay. And, this is an adjacent study, an adjacent question, pardon me. Has a traffic study been done to account for increased vehicle flow to the parking lot via Pleasant and Clay Spring? I think that question largely is largely directed at the new parking along the courts, which is, as you said, Michelle, in phase 2, so not in phase 1. Okay.
It would be phase 2, and like I said, it's not ready for prime time. It's just
Right.
It's just an idea. We obviously have to reach out to the community members and the abutters to really discuss how parking would affect the neighborhood.
Right.
Okay.
One more comment I'd like to make, Brian, if I might. Just going back to my point about the minimum versus more than a minimum, rather than developing land, tearing down trees and to make room for more courts, can we design the existing courts for tennis and pickleball. So you'll have fewer courts, I grant you, but at least you'll have some. And then hopefully, and I hate that word, I'll stop using it. And then possibly the parking would continue at the very top of the hill at Milliken for those people who are using those courts. So we're repurposing some of the tennis for pickleball and leaving the space as is and avoiding the cost of bulldozing woods and building a road and building parking area.
Sure. So Mike, I can answer a part of that question, which is reducing the number of courts. In order to be competitive in the high school sporting arena, you need 5 courts to be competitive and host tournaments. So that's why we keep it at a minimum of 5. If you have less than 5, you can't host tournaments, and tournaments can turn into almost a revenue generator for future maintenance of the courts, if in fact we keep that minimum of 5.
And do we get any revenue now when we host tournaments?
So we can't host tournaments because the condition of our courts.
Okay.
So let me ask a question, Michelle. If we, am I looking at this correctly that we currently have 6 courts up there?
We do.
We do. Okay. And Ralph, let me ask you a question. In terms of the temporary reconfiguration for pickleball, how quick is it to switch from one to the other?
Well, I don't know directly. I just look at what they do. They just wheel out a net and then they reline the courts, the tennis courts, on a permanent basis. So you can see the actual dimensions of the court. So it's permanent in the relining of the court, and it's temporary in the use of the net itself. So the net can be moved back and forth and the lines stay permanent.
Okay.
And so you get double duty out of a tennis court for a pickleball court.
Okay. But the tennis lines stay and the pickleball lines get superimposed. So it's no different than a soccer / men's / women's lacrosse court,
That's
which
right.
all have different lines, and you just need to know which ones you're playing on.
That's right.
Okay. Do we know if that disqualifies a tennis court from competition use for tournament purposes? I don't want to guess, but it would seem analogous to, the soccer and lacrosse example I just mentioned. But if you lay down a bunch of additional lines on a regulation tennis court, can you no longer hold tournaments there or competition play?
So Brian, I don't have the answer to that. The only answer I have to that is we reached out to the tennis coach, both the male and female tennis coach at the high school, and
let me guess, they don't want to share?
it's not that they don't want to share. They think it muddies the waters a little bit for their competition teams, but I don't know if that's a rule or if it's more of a preference.
Well, there is sort of an example of that. If you play singles on a doubles court, you're using a different set of lines anyway. So there are examples. However, they're not superimposed on one another. They're separate. But nevertheless, you can take advantage of a singles court that has double lines. So anyway.
Michelle, if in your next presentations or your next version, if you could give us a rundown of what the population will be that will use these facilities, whether it's high school sports, whether it's the public, how many people are you expecting over what time period? And by time period, I'm saying by season perhaps, so that if in winter there's no one using it, whereas in spring, I'm guessing would be the highest use.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide that.
Thanks.
So another question popped up here. Will the pickleball nets be removable? If so, how will they be stored, and who would ensure that they are maintained properly?
Right. You want me to take that?
Yeah, I think Ralph's partially answered it to the extent that they were temporary or multi-purpose, but in the context of just the dedicated pickleball courts, I guess that's a separate question.
Yeah, so for any of the courts, the netting would come down in the winter months, and be stored by the recreation department. And once again, with these renovations and improvements to our fields, we are working on a comprehensive maintenance plan to make sure that we're investing in something and that we're maintaining it. I think everyone's heard everyone loud and clear that if we're going to make an investment, we need to make an investment in maintenance as well. So we are working on that plan.
And of course, if we make an investment, we have to fund it. Hopefully everyone heard that part too, which at least in this cycle seems to be falling on deaf ears. Okay. And was there any discussion about just doing the tennis courts, its retaining wall, and drainage?
We did discuss that. And the idea was to add pickleball courts later on would be much more costly than adding them now. So that's why we decided, 5 and 5 was probably best, because there's a lot of people requesting pickleball courts. And it does seem to be like the new thing. I know they have them in surrounding communities. They're busy all the time. But if it's shrinking the project and that's what the recommendation is, we can go back and get pricing to shrink the project.
Do others agree with my take on that, to try and, for all of the proponents that are coming before us, ask them to go back to their thinking and see what can be done to come up with a minimum viable proposal?
I
Is the
agree
rest-
with that. I agree with that, Mike. I do.
Okay.
This is pretty expensive for a new sport, which has yet to. I guess they've started to make tournaments out of this, but this is a brand new sport, so it's unusual to decide to buy or put money into a sport which is just starting and might evolve into something still again. So I'm not sure where I don't know where pickleball is really going at this stage in the evolution of racquetball sports. So it's unusual to see it as a town requirement at this stage, in my view. But anyway, that's my personal view of it. You tend to see this in clubs, but you don't tend to see this as a public municipal facility. This is early for a public municipal facility, to be honest with you. So, although you see it in clubs, you definitely see it there.
Thinking out loud on this, Ralph, seizing on your your observations at the Y.
Yeah.
If we redid the courts as they are, 6 of them, and then overstriped one of them to become, multi-purpose, that would give us, one marked up tennis court, if you want to play tennis on it for recreational purposes. It would leave 5 unmarked tennis courts for competition purposes, which is really what high school is anyway, because you've got 5 singles and then 2 doubles, and usually what your singles players play the doubles generally. Maybe it's not the case anymore, but it used to be. So you can have all your 5 singles play at the same time, and then your doubles play after that. And it seemed like 5 was the minimum anyway. So you've got 5 tennis courts that are not marked dual purpose. You've got 1 that's marked dual purpose, which gives you two pickleball courts to start and see where it goes. That's one way to approach this.
Well, just to give you a proportion, I'd say 2 of the 8 indoor hard courts at the Y are convertible and used that way. Of course, none of the clay courts, you can't do clay courts with that.
Right.
You get 2 out of the 8 are actually sacrificed that way. Right. Yeah. So it's maybe the proportion is something like 25%, something like that. So.
Yeah.
So Michelle, one other item to put on your list is the noise factor. And one of our people watching, WBERMS, mentioned and included a link to a WCVB story on noise in Wellesley.
I have
Unfortunately,
seen that.
I think that's a really important part of research and try and get a handle on a noise factor.
And also to Ted, you just made a comment. It seems like they should evaluate the position location of the pickleball courts interior far end, just further away from residential areas.
That's for sure.
Certainly further away from Bancroft. I don't know if it's any. I guess it would be no further away from the folks on Pleasant.
Unfortunately, no.
It would be a wash, but it would certainly at least provide relief on the Bancroft side.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that just brings me back to the question I raised about putting courts in the open space behind the Pratt Library, the old Osgood.
yeah.
So not looking for an answer here, but it should be taken into consideration.
So the only thing I can say about that is we just approved the library's amphitheater.
Yeah, that's a different section though.
It's a different section, but
Yeah.
if they're going to be having shows, and we're worried about noise, I don't know that that's a great alternative either.
Well, it should be looked at. It really should. And, placement of pickleball courts would be dependent on its noise factor. And whether it's a program going on for the library or abutters who live just beyond a strip of woods, same thing. It needs to be an important factor in the design. We're trying not to say no, but we're also trying to balance everyone's wishes.
Yep, I hear you loud and clear. So we'll get some more information on that and get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, another question just came up. Music Circus parking lot question mark. I'll just answer that. It's not the town's property.
Private property.
It's privately owned by the Music Circus, unfortunately. So they would want to need to get into the pickleball business for that to happen.
But thank you for your ideas, WBERMS or ERNS.
All very helpful. One more question, Michelle. Looking at this page, that the pickleball courts are obviously closer to Bancroft. Is there a reason that they were put at that end where the tennis courts currently reside versus leaving the tennis courts where they are and adding the pickleball in the back corner?
There's no great reason. The only reason is we can reuse the retaining wall. So that was the only reason they were going to put pickleball there. Like I said, the configuration can change depending on what's there, but it would just go that entire length.
Right. Can we not reuse the retaining wall if we leave them there, leave the tennis courts there?
I think that you would need more earthwork if you were to leave them there.
Leave the tennis courts there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, just optically looks like a straight line where the straight line is today, but maybe I'm missing something. Separating the fields from the courts.
We did look at that site, Mike, that you're referencing, that we were just discussing, the library, that space by recreation.
Mhm.
Next to the basketball courts.
Yeah.
And according to our recreation director, that is programmed. It's used for a summer program. It's used for.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, look, so at least one alternative to think about is redo the 6 courts where they are, restripe one, at least as a convertible court, start it out as pickleball and see where the demand goes. And if we got comfortable that, that we weren't compromising the other courts by striping them for, overlay striping them for pickleball, then we could always add more. Or convert more, I guess would be the right way to say it.
It would be demand-based, I would think. That's how you're looking
Right.
at it, right? Yeah.
Right. But you pick up 2 pickleball courts right away.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, anything else on this first page? All right, let's move to the next page. So I have 2 questions just to kick this off. You stated that the current field up there is not competition size. When I look at it striped in here on the lower rendition, it doesn't look like we've increased the grass area at all. Am I correct in that
No,
statement?
so Brian, that's a great question, because we had the same question when we reviewed the plan the first time, and they do cut in a bit to the wooded area by the by the softball diamond to extend the field. It is extended a little bit.
Is this, when you say regulation, what level of lacrosse? And the reason I ask this is I spent several years as a parent on the sidelines watching both my sons playing youth lacrosse right on that field. And it was in constant use on the weekends. This was generally under 14 lacrosse, so not intended for high school, but I'm thinking that, it's there, it's been used in the past. Why do we need a whole new field there?
Yep, so it doesn't meet the minimum requirements any longer. It's funny that you bring this up, because I think I was talking to Brian about it last week. In high school, I used to play soccer in the front field of the high school, and it's no longer regulation any longer, but it once was. So I don't know if it's just the changing dynamics of field size and competition and regulation, but it just doesn't meet the needs any longer.
I would want to double check that for youth lacrosse, because if it will still work for youth lacrosse, then we've got something already in hand.
Yeah.
And then it would be a demonstrated need that you need a regulation size field for lacrosse leagues that are beyond youth.
Yep. So Mike, this is for a youth lacrosse field, but I will double check and get you the actual data so you have it.
Yeah, okay, just demonstrate that,
Yeah, sure.
what's there is inadequate.
Yep, not a problem.
Okay.
So, okay, so basically they're cutting, I'm just eyeing this up side by side. It looks like they're cutting a very small amount of woods back there. It's hard to tell because the shadows on the field in the upper picture. It's hard to even tell how much, but this is a handful of trees, right? Is that about it? I'm looking at the playground on the lower left-hand side relative to the corner of the grassed area, and
There's not significant clearing, Brian. It's not significant.
and I assume it's flat back there. What is, I'm trying to figure out what's driving 660 grand, because I've got a chainsaw. I can cut the trees for you. I'm being facetious, but if this was a residential home site, this is like 20 grand worth of work.
Well, this is also your drainage. So you have to take that into effect. There's several components that go into this, and I can get you the full breakdown.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah, we do have that.
But,
Yeah,
that-
and
that'd be really helpful.
if this field is expanded, it becomes a yet another multi-use field, right, in town. So that helps with our deficiencies.
Yes, I hear that. What I'm struggling to understand is the actual cost of slightly increasing an existing field.
Yep, and I can actually have that too tomorrow.
So Michelle, I'm assuming that it's gonna get regraded because my recollection is it's not exactly flat.
There's definitely earthwork needed
Yeah.
on that field.
On the field or in the area where you would clear, which I'm certain you need to do some.
It's a little of both, Brian, to be honest.
Okay.
We only have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to make one comment or question for Michelle, and that is, can you come back with a proposal that deletes the lighting, that deletes the lacrosse wall, and that deletes fencing?
Sure, I can come back with any semblance of a proposal you'd like to see.
Okay, I'll just say this, the lacrosse wall, for many, many seasons, most kids were using the side wall of Deer Hill School as a lacrosse wall, and the coaches would tell the kids, go up to Deer Hill and practice up there against the wall. So $115,000 lacrosse wall to me is an extravagance and not worthy of underwriting by the town.
Just
Michelle,
totally.
if there were
I-
a wall, where is that located in the picture? Is it near the baseball field there?
It is. It is. And there are several proponents for this lacrosse wall in town. So while I can get an a la carte menu of what we'd like to see, I just want to make sure that we're bringing forth everything that was discussed in the public forums for phase one. I just don't want to shortchange anybody because they spent a lot
Yeah.
of time on this.
Okay, I think it would be helpful, Michelle, that whoever the proponents are for the lacrosse wall might want to make a personal appearance on
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
You've got at least 3 parents, lacrosse parents on this committee that are just totally perplexed by this. I've never seen multiple kids playing on a wall. I mean, that you use a rebounder when you can't find someone to play with. So the idea that we need a wall for a team is, it kind of defies logic. I mean, literally 10 minutes before this meeting began, my daughter asked me to join her in the backyard to practice some cuts. She's got her own rebounder there, which we picked up for $50 used locally. They're everywhere, right? Most people will give you one, otherwise it's short money. But the best practice is to play with another person, always. So I'm just perplexed why we would need a wall, anyway.
There is another comment that says children are no longer permitted to use the school wall for practice. So I'll take that as one reason. But I just want to make sure we got that question answered before we hit the 6 p.m.
Okay.
mark.
The only question I would have for you, Michelle, is that every time I go by the Beechwood ballpark, it is empty. It is a gorgeous field and the grass is in wonderful condition. It may not be perfectly level in the outfield, but I wonder why we don't ever use that field for any of these possible sports. We don't seem to.
Yep. So Ralph, I can get you the study. And we did look at that. That was definitely something we looked at because you're not the only one that's raising that. So I can show you the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I think this is it for phase one. We're gonna have town hall on in 3 minutes. Do we want to spend 3 minutes on phase two? Do you want to spend 3 minutes on Beechwood Playground? How would you like to use the time, Michelle?
So I'd love just to tee up Beechwood Playground, if
Okay.
you wouldn't mind. So there's proponents from the Beechwood neighborhood to have the Beechwood Playground replaced. You've already funded the repairs, which are on order. We're waiting for the date for the repairs to happen. There's still several proponents for a new playground. A big question was ADA compliance. Do we need the poured rubber surface? Are wood chips okay? And if it's not okay here, why is it okay at our other playgrounds? So what we've done is we've hired an ADA expert to come out and actually test all the playgrounds. And he'll be in town next week to give us a full report of what we have and what we need in the future. So it won't just be focusing on Beechwood. It'll be, yes, we're focused on Beechwood because they want that complete renovation, but it's also, what are we going to do with all of our other playgrounds in town in the future? So we'll get a comprehensive report for him. So I don't want to waste your time talking solely about Beechwood tonight when we can talk about everything else in a couple of weeks.
Okay,
Okay.
just one observation. I know Luis Demas and the prior super and the school committee spent a lot of time reviewing ADA compliance. I thought for all the playgrounds in town, certainly for the school playgrounds. I just ask that we make sure we not spend money on consultants repeating something that might have already been done.
Yep. So the good news here, Brian, and I'm not saying this is if it's okay if we spend the money twice, but we do have a grant to review our ADA compliance. So
Okay.
we're going to utilize funding from that.
All right.
Okay.
Brian, there's one more question from Sean. Didn't the lax boosters offer dollars for a lax wall? So I'll just leave that with you, Michelle. There's a question to be answered. Thanks. Thank you, Sean.
Sure.
Okay. So hopefully we're joined by the town hall folks. I don't know if they're in your queue yet, Michelle, but
They are. So thank you for sharing the fields and
Mhm.
courts.
Thank you.
thanks for the effort you're putting into this.
Yes.
I do believe, just as a closing comment, it's really important that the proponents of this ultimately step forward. It's a bit odd that it's being presented and advanced by someone other than a department.
So would there be a citizens petition warrant article to request
Typically,
this?
a department,
Yeah.
typically a department sponsors a project, and this strikes me as rec.
Mhm.
So we have a question. Jean Healy Dippold has her hand raised.
Okay. Would you like to go ahead and put her on, Michelle?
She's on.
Okay.
Hey, everyone, sorry, I can't unvideo myself, but I did want to just respond to the last question where this is a select board initiative. It's been part of our goals this year as well as last year. We spent a lot of time with Michelle, as some of you have probably seen through, probably every third meeting throughout the year, working through the field study and different iterations, trying to quote, slim down the proposal. As you may remember, there was a warrant article that was being contemplated back in the fall. We took a pause, including based on some of your thoughtful feedback, to try to see how to phase this out and continue to try to see how we can save money, but still deliver results for the town. We've had forums. So there's been a lot of work that's gone on. Michelle has
Right.
definitely taken a leading role at the direction of the select board, but
Mhm.
I don't want there to be any confusion that the select board is asking Michelle and directing town staff, which is appropriate. Sometimes we don't create committees. Sometimes we direct town staff to just move through and host forums, and that's what's happening here.
Okay. So it's, okay. I'm just processing this. It's sort of, okay, it's a select board initiative without a committee and without a department, but with a very good advocate in Michelle.
With a great advocate.
You couldn't find a better advocate. We've just never seen one come this way before. I guess I have to process it. I just would encourage everyone to recognize that, Michelle's not going to run these courts and Michelle's not going to build these courts. So sooner or later, somebody has to own, to actually own the execution, implementation, and management of this asset.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. And we've been working with the schools and we've had meetings with the rec commissioners as well to try to get everyone to a place of consensus. Capital is one step in a group of many stakeholders,
Yep.
Towards that end goal. And a part of this, if you look at the field study too, relates to how better to use our existing assets, use what we have instead of creating brand new fields, which if you look at the field study, you'll see that is extremely expensive. So
Yes.
there's been a lot of time put into trying to figure out how to maximize our existing assets.
Okay. All right, it's 6:03. We've got the Town Hall Building Committee online, and we should move to that agenda item.
Thanks, Michelle.
I will
No.
get back to you with all those questions answered.
Ready for us?
We are ready, Phil.
All right, good. Thank you for having us tonight first.
Thanks for
Phil Lear,
joining us.
Phil Lear, Chairman of the Town Hall Building Committee, and we have Mark Cameron, excuse me, and Gert Lubitz, and they have a PowerPoint presentation. The two of them will do the presentation, and we'll be around for questions afterwards.
All right, good evening, everyone. Can you see the screen okay with the picture of the town hall?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so these are still some of the renderings that we have for the town hall, the renovation and the new addition. Another view of it from the diagonal angle, still on Highland Ave. Committee is made up of 7 of us right now. Phil, Garrett, and I are here tonight. So just a brief recap here of where we've come on this committee on this round. 2019, 2020, we were assembled as a committee to look at renovate and rebuild options, keeping the town hall at 41 Highland Ave and keeping the 1800s structure intact and renovating that. In annual town meeting of 2021, we were appropriated money to create a design, which is an option that was to renovate the 1800s and rebuild a new addition on the annex side. So we got to that conclusion via rough order of magnitude pricing for what each options would consist of. And based on what our findings, programming needs of the space, we concluded that it would be best to rebuild a new addition. And then in May, annual town meeting, May of 2020, we were appropriated money to hire a construction manager for pre-construction services to help us through the process here of getting an estimate and continuing with the planned renovation and new addition. Garrett, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Mark, for handing this off. I think Mark did, just gave us a brief update on where we stand today. And to bring you a little bit further up to speed, a couple of months ago, we brought on board a CM at risk, which is a contract manager who is going to work with us throughout the pre-construction process. And then if we move forward with the project, would also work with us during the construction process as well. So one of the first things that we did with this CM, we shared with them our CD95s, which are the 95% construction document, and that represents all of the architectural renderings, the engineering plans, sort of at what is referred to as a 95% completion level. So it doesn't include things like specify, what color light fixtures are going to be and things like that, but it does have all of the significant engineering plans in there. Doors are in the right places, walls are in the right places. Everything that sort of would give you a pretty good sense for what the costs of the project would be. And so we asked them to look at these plans and these documents and come up with an estimate for what they believe this project would cost to get us to completion. And keep in mind that this is an estimate. It's not a quotation. We haven't received any bids on the project, but their estimate is that the construction cost for the project would cost a little bit over $17.8 million. Now that's just the construction. There would also be soft soft costs and contingencies that would be added that bring us to the total project budget of just over $22 million. Now there are a couple of other line items in there, and we can drill into those later, but I just wanted to flag that, we've had some questions around what VE means. VE is value engineering, and that is reflecting amounts that our CM has given us some ideas on ways to save some money on this project. So this is reflecting about $600,000 in cost savings that they believe that we could save off of the project based off of sort of the plans that were handed over to them. By taking some of the recommendations that they would have to save some money. So we can move to the next slide, Mark. So what this means is, so we've got the top line figure, which is the $22.1 million or thereabouts cost for the total project budget. And as Mark mentioned, we've received a few appropriations already, which need to be deducted because that's not money we'd be seeking additional funding for. So it rounds up to about 1.4, or I think it's maybe exactly $1.4 million that we have already received funding for. So knocking down the amount we'd be looking for funding for, and then potential CPC grants would also be applied to the total project budget. We met with CPC on Monday. We don't have a commitment from them for these amounts. This $6.9 million figure is just reflective of what we believe could potentially be covered by a CPC grant. And so, there are certain requirements on what CPC can fund, and the $6.9 million figure is an approximation of what we believe could be funded by CPC. So that brings us down to a new assumed total of $13,785,824. So and about $13.8 million is the total amount that we would be looking for funding at town meeting. Next slide, Mark.
Can I hold you there, please? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Gert.
Sure.
This is Mike Dick.
Yep.
I attended the CPC meeting the other night, and I heard very clearly that there is absolutely no appetite for a $6.9 million contribution. The number that I believe your group offered was 5 million. And even there was a great deal of concern. So I think in your calculations for us, I think 6.9 is not right. And perhaps ought to be 5 million at best. So I just want to offer that before we go much further, that the total obligation on part of the town is not what you've got on here.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a fair point. We're still in conversations with CPC, so I don't think that there's been any indication. I know what had been offered by CPC in the previous round was $4.2 million. We'd received some earlier indications that CPC would be willing to go above and beyond that, and so we were encouraged to max out what we thought the CPC could fund. The feedback we received on Monday was that they were going to have to look hard at the numbers. They've got a lot of different projects that they need to look at. So you're right that that may not be the overall reflective number, and so we're trying to figure out what that would be. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today, to talk to you about what we can, how we can fund this project.
It's really about what was CPC eligible, right? So we were given early guidance to communicate what was CPC eligible. CPC would always have the ability to come back with amount that they felt was suitable from their end. But again, it was that was the premise here. And they even said in the meeting on Monday that it might take a few meetings for them to come up with a number that they feel comfortable with. Yeah. So for right now, for the purposes of our presentation here, we're running with what's the ceiling, if you will, of the CPC eligible numbers. And until they come back with a number that is something that we can plug in, we'll make that adjustment when they make a decision.
Fair. Okay.
All right, so continuing on with the presentation, one of the things that we wanted to look at before we, sort of made any recommendations or sort of socialized these plans was to just level set and make sure that we still thought that this project was the right project for the town to pursue. And so, as we've done throughout this project over the past few years, is to look for ways to see, is there a cheaper way of doing something similar? And one of the things that we decided to look at, and we've looked at consistently, is what would it cost to just renovate the current building? Recognizing that renovating the current building would not, accommodate all of the needs of the town, but thinking about what that would cost us, and doing sort of a rough estimate of those costs. We recognizing we don't have those 95% construction documents, but looking at sort of based off of a square footage estimate, what we think that project would cost. And so again, our CM ran those figures for us, and we came up with a total construction cost estimate of about $13.1 million. Now, again, there would be soft costs, appropriations that have already been made, and again, potential CPC grant, and we've got that same $6.9 million figure in there, which again, to your point, Mike, is not reflective of anything that's been committed at this point, and that's really just a placeholder. So okay. if it makes people more comfortable, we can talk about, we can eliminate that and think about what the entire project cost would be. And that then would get us to a total project cost for a renovation of approximately $10.4 million. So what that means is that the project that we've been, pursuing over the last 3 years, which is the renovation of the old town hall and the rebuild of the annex, would cost about $13.8 million. Now, again, that's deducting a potential CPC grant, which we've acknowledged may not be, that full value of $6.9 million. And if, perhaps it's even likely that it won't be the $6.9 million. And then comparing that to just a strict renovation would be about $10.4 million. So the delta between those projects, which would be consistent, assuming, wiping away the CPC grants and appropriations to date, et cetera, is about $3.4 million. And recognizing that a renovation would still leave us with a building that is that's really not fit for purpose at this point. It doesn't meet the needs of the town. We're running out of space as it is. Doesn't have meeting spaces, et cetera. And it would also, that's the cost that it would cost today. Undoubtedly, since we don't have plans for this, the cost would go up, when we would have plans for this, which would be, we could talk about it, 2 years from now or something like that would be sort of best case scenario. So with all that being said, our firm belief is still that the renovation and rebuild is the option that we should be pursuing at this point. We come to you today to talk about ways that we could fund this, and what we can do to put this to come up with a number and that we can put in front of the town for town meeting, and recognizing that this is a conversation that's going to have to take place, with the select board, who we met with last week. We met with advisory last week, met with CPC on Monday, and now we're meeting with you today. So recognizing that there are conversations that need to be had on many levels, but we do believe that that we've been down this process enough. We've examined all of the options, and we really think that this is a project that we need to be pushing forward at this time. So with that, I will turn it over to Capital Budget Committee for questions that you might have for our group.
I'll go ahead and lead off because let's just cut straight to the elephant in the room. And correct me if I get any of this wrong, but we could probably go back and pull the materials and confirm it one way or the other. But when we set aside the 750 for this at STM in 2021, this was a 14 and change project, right? 14 million something. In March of 22, after we set that 750 aside, the price was revisited and it went up to 16. And that's the number that everybody was, I think, had in their heads when we put aside the extra 200, it took 200 of the 750, I should say, and cleared it for, to hire the CM at risk. Between March of last year and August of last year, the price went from 16 to 20. And from August of last year to, to February this year, now March, the price went from 20 to 23. So very specifically, it's critical to understand what happened to drive the price up by 40%, 12 months. And what makes it particularly perplexing to me is that this is a prevailing wage job. So the wages should be set by the government. And we're already way above private market numbers. The price of lumber has come back down to almost pre-pandemic levels. And virtually all the supply chain nonsense and whatnot, was seen long before March of last year, right? This is not something that happened in the past 12 months. And if anything, there are signs in the marketplace, and we just heard it in the context of the top tennis courts, where the price of tennis courts is coming back down, right? Because the price of oil is back down to pre-pandemic levels. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. So what am I missing? What happened in the past 12 months to cause this price to go up by 40%?
So there's a couple of factors that play in here. So one of the factors is a cost estimate, besides the cost estimate here that we're basing these numbers off here. The last cost estimate was done over a year and a half ago, and that to 2 years. And that cost estimate was then escalated up to be comparative on a general sense. It wasn't gone through line by line and re-estimated every couple of months. So as time was progressing, we were truing up that we were trying to escalate that estimate up based on what we're globally seeing in the market. And certainly every piece of material varies, some more than others. I will still say that there is quite a bit of supply chain issues on electrical items these days. It's still a relevant problem. It's still a big problem. Generators, main electrical gear, panels, it's all big delays in that equipment. So this is a cost estimate based on the market historical data. This is what our construction manager is providing, a cost estimate. As Garrett said, it is not a bid. It is not a competitive market driven number. And when we come back at annual town meeting with a number, it's likely going to adjust from this number that we're presenting here, because as we get closer to annual town meeting, the drawings will have been bid. They're currently going out right now with our CM, and the numbers that we'll be receiving then is a competitive market. And so that's the market feedback. The market is what the market is. We can certainly look at line by line and try and analyze things, but that number that is forthcoming, which will be received shortly before annual town meeting. And the reason for that is because of bids only being valid for X amount of days. So we're doing that as close to town meeting so that when we, present this in front of the town in that town meeting, and if there's a yes vote, then our bids are still valid instead of having to go back out onto the market for new bids because too much time has passed. So really, again, it's what the market is willing to to bear.
Yes, at any moment. So let me cut this short because I'm not sure we're any closer to an answer to my question. If I embrace for a moment that it is what it is, okay, which we'll take that debate and we'll set it aside for a second. Just take that at face value. That means it was what it was, right? In March of 2022. So did we just get the number completely wrong in 2022? I guess it's not you guys, it's your advisors. I mean, did they just whiff on the cost estimate, or something changed to cause them to believe that today it's up by 40%? Because I don't see anything that's happened in the macro environment or any of the inputs here that would have driven the cost of this building up by 40% in 12 months. I mean, I'm just totally perplexed. And I'll tell you, just psychologically, I was following with this project. When it leaped from 16 to 20, my brain melted down. And at 23, it's hard to figure out where it went. And so I'm just trying to follow along. And I apologize, I'm not going to keep chasing this if there's just no answer, but it would be helpful to understand. I think it'd be helpful for me, certainly probably everyone else, to understand why did this price move this month?
I mean, certainly the more time we have with the number, we can dig into see what lines have gone up and down more so than others. We just haven't had that amount of time yet to dig into the number. You know, we as a committee have been stopped and started so many times through this process that we have had a great amount of momentum at times, and then just completely had the rug taken out from under us and stopped. And this has been over 3 years that this committee has been working on this before it's even being brought to town meeting floor as a full comprehensive project. So there's quite a number of time that's gone by. I mean, you know,
I'm just focusing on the past 12 months, Mark. I mean, I was right there with you guys.
But that number, again, that number in the last 12 months was a number it's 2 years old. That was just escalated up by a percentage. It wasn't a calculated line by line of what the steel market and the wood market and how concrete and supply chain issues. And it's not that scientific. It's calculated on a rough percentage.
Okay, it sounds like we're just gonna have to see where the bids come in. I just, for the life of me, don't understand how it went from 16 to 23 in a little over 12 months. It just, I'm gonna need, I'll just sort of flag it for you. I'm gonna need, like, for my head to even process, I'm gonna need to understand how that happened. Others may feel differently.
Yeah, we'll get you. We'll look at those numbers, Brian. But
Okay.
you know, just to emphasize the point that Mark was making, those interim numbers that you had seen just reflected a flat across the board adjustment, where we looked at the overall project budget and said, well, we didn't make the assumption, but this was from Vertex, our project manager, that basically said, well, we've seen escalations on these types of projects of X%. And so we plugged that in and didn't do a line item by line item, which this estimate, I would say, is the best estimate that we've received to date. Now, whether or not there were faulty assumptions that were made along the way to get here, I can't speak to that. But I do feel like, comfortable in saying that what we have today, that $23 million figure, is the best estimate that we have received to date.
Okay. I hear that it's the most detailed. It's just completely disconnected from where we started. I've lost the ability to follow it at this point, but let's just move on. One of the numbers that caught my attention is the site work at 2.9 million. I'm trying to figure out what's driving that in particular, and the analogy that's sort of, or the benchmark that I've got kicking in my head is that, we as a town really redesigned and repaved and recurbed and re-sidewalked, and created parking spots and a whole bunch of other things all the way around the common for a few $100,000, right? This is a relatively small parcel. There's very little earthwork. I mean, there are a couple of graded, slopes tapering the sidewalks to higher elevation. But there's not much complexity there. So what is it that's driving $2.9 million worth of site work?
So part of the site work is, removal, excavation and removal of the old foundation.
Okay,
Utilities coming in, regrading, drainage. A lot of, systems there. We're talking, so fire protection line coming in, domestic water lines coming in, electrical service lines coming in, sewer, site drainage, and then you've got all of your finished materials there, your paving, your curbings, your sidewalks, your approaches into the building. That a lot of thought has gone into the handicap accessibility of the.
it's a beautiful
both
design.
buildings.
I'm just
So
totally
there's-
perplexed at the number.
It's there's a lot that's been put into that. It's the ramps are not some wood framed ramps like we have now. They're more long term in terms of durability and longevity. And again, in ways to invite the accessibility for everybody to both the new entrance of the annex and the entrance of Old Town Hall. Which is, again, something that currently does not exist. There is no
Okay.
accessibility into the entrance of Old Town Hall.
Yep. So look, I'll repeat it. It's a beautiful design. I don't have any issue with the design. Are you saying that you guys have drilled into these numbers and you're confident that it costs $2.9 million to do a little bit of grading, add the sidewalks where they are, plus add a better ramp?
So the sidewalks where they are really irrelevant. The whole site is going to get torn up because of
No,
all
I
of the
know.
work that's being done. So
Yeah.
whether there's a sidewalk there or not now is not really relevant because either way it's
Maybe I
coming out.
misspoke. I didn't mean to imply it was. But
And it's not as simple as it's being presented. There is a lot of complexity there. Even in our value engineering, we've looked at the depth of the parking lot, a subgrade, and reduce the subgrade. And as we're doing, I believe Commodore was on site today doing borings to look at the subgrade levels. And we've already reduced it once in terms of the depth of the subgrade. We're looking to see if we can further reduce the amount of subgrade material so that we can further reduce the cost. So that's one of the components that's already been in the value engineering, but we had to obtain some more data to present it to the engineer of record to say, can we reduce the subgrade depth, or are we good with what we have there right now?
okay, so basically you're saying you guys have drilled through this number and you're comfortable it's going to cost $2.9 million on the site work.
We've only had the numbers for about a week, which is why
Okay.
these meetings were. So we've been on this tour of presenting to all the various committees. We really got the number and we had to run to these committees as fast as possible and haven't had a chance to comb through each line by line. We're working towards that now as the CM is preparing the bid packages to go out to the subcontractor market for their feedback.
Okay.
Right, but the design is what the design is. So the subcontractor market will help be an indication of what that really is. Maybe there's a competitive nature there and some of these numbers will come down and maybe our estimate's a little bit high. But again, it's an estimate, it's not a bid.
I totally understood. Okay, I don't want to dominate the conversation. I know other members of the committee have questions, observations. Who'd like to go next? Anyone?
Want me to take it on a little bit? Let me say, I fully understand the frustration this committee must be feeling. That this is the second go round for most of you, so I understand it well. I think to some degree, you were handed a charge that could not be fulfilled. And if you remember, that charge occurred when the town rejected the last attempt at a town hall design. And at that time, the select board decided the only way you'd get the actual town to agree to a new design was if the town would fund this out of operating capital, and it was specifically putting the charge to the committee. I believe that probably was an impossibility, and I don't know whether you thought of that at the time, but once you began to exceed that, it became obvious that in fact this could never be done out of the operating budget and would require excluded debt, which then puts you in the unfortunate position of going right back to the public with the same question, which was rejected only a few years ago. So I understand you must be feeling a lot of frustration about where you are now. I asked myself, and we had asked years and years ago, why we don't get a well-defined proposal for renovating the existing town hall. And I know that it was never really carefully considered because you never got that as a charge. I don't think at any time you were given that charge. In fact, when I look back at the original sort of decisions that were made and who made them, even at the time of Mike Milanowski, you were just said to go figure out how to build a new town hall. That's all that was ever said, and it continues to be that. And never was it a charge to seriously consider renovating the existing one. Ironically, in 2014, HKT Architects, who were leveraging what had been done by Carr, Lynch, and Sandell back in 2008, did provide some really detailed information about what they recommended in the way of renovation of the 1987 edition we're talking about, as well as what it would cost to do the old town hall. And ironically, it was never a significant amount of money because they determined that things like the electrical panel, which was 600 amps and 3-phase, was actually perfectly adequate for supporting both buildings, and that's what exists today. They also looked into the boiler system and the HVAC, and they considered it reasonable to continue to use those, both the boiler and the HVAC system. So what did they recommend at that time? If they said, if you really wanted to renovate it, here are the minimum things you needed to do. And it was based on the fact that the windows had been installed in such a way that they caused rot in the sills or the aprons underneath the windows, that the roof needed to be done, and the siding should be stripped from the 87, and not to the old building, but to the 87 building. You should strip the siding, get rid of the asphalt covering, and put a more modern, breathable coating or surface on that, and then re-side it. But at the same time, take a look at whether or not any of the boards underneath the siding were rotted. And it turns out that most of the borings indicated there was no rot there anyway. So they came up with, surprisingly, for doing the roof, doing the siding, replacing the windows, something under $1 million. And I wondered why no one ever really took them up seriously. And I will ask you the question that comes up, and I know you're going to say this, but what is the exact 30% of the assessed valuation of that 1987 building that you can't exceed? And what is that number? And is it possible to stay within that without touching all of the ADA and other code requirements, which would otherwise be required if you exceed that 30%? So I'm asking a very specific question based on information that was actually developed in great detail back in 2014. Anyway, that's the question.
So as I'm pulling up the some information here, we took a study, and maybe Michelle can remember the name of the firm that did it, but it was a study that that addressed all of the deficiencies in both buildings. And that was the study and the recommendations that were taken to come up with the basis of what a renovation only number would look like. And that's the number that is included in our presentation.
I'm only asking that why is there such a difference between what was said in 2014 and what you're saying now?
Well,
And if I
2014 was also 9 years ago at this point. So I'm sure there's more issues now. I mean, I'm sure the elevator wasn't on that. So there's other components there that make up that.
So if I may, Ralph, the total assessed cost is 1.796 of the existing building.
Okay, got it. That's helpful, right?
The existing building its valuation says $941,000 for just the building, not the building and the land.
That's correct.
So what's the 1.796 versus the 900,000?
The
That's
one
building
seven,
and land.
I see.
that's building and land.
So it's down to 900,000. So you got 300,000 to work with. That's not very much.
That'll get us an elevator.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it won't get you much of anything. No.
Gets us a reminder that we should actually look at the assessments of our public buildings from time to time, which I doubt ever gets done given they're not taxed. So why would you? But, and it's not a comment on town hall. It's a comment broadly. We run into this issue, every time we get into even a moderate maintenance project, you cross through this 30% number because the assessments are.
And
Just to give you a sort of a basis of comparison, that I'm in a 55-year-old house that would probably be valued at $3 million. I mean, so it gives you an idea, and has never been seriously renovated in that way that we're talking about. So, I mean, these numbers the assessed valuations are just not realistic.
That's my point. If we're just talking
no,
about
there's
a building.
understood there. I mean, no disagreement there, but again, the functional needs of the town hall have drastically changed, more so than the home that you're probably residing in right now in terms of bedrooms and functional needs here. We've clearly indicated through our space programming needs that there's not enough seats in town hall. So to spend the money to renovate that building when it doesn't check the boxes of having enough seats for the people that are slated to occupy it, as well as the meeting space, there isn't really a functional meeting room there. There's the auditorium space, and then we had a meeting there, our group, and the only space that was available for the number of people we had really was the break room on the second floor. I mean, that's really all that was available.
Well, that is very ironic, because before COVID we did pretty well, but okay, and we could talk about that. I won't get
But now there's 3 people that occupy the area outside the selectman's office, and those people weren't always there. That was one person, and that used to be where the meetings were held. There's
I'm incredibly familiar with it, probably more than anybody, having spent years and years there, so I do know it. And we did function rather well, but anyway, and I'm not going to debate it tonight. I'm just saying that I think the inability to deal with that is probably is something that could be dealt with. But anyway, I'm not going to go any farther than that. So.
Michael, Susan?
Susan, do you have anything?
I don't have anything different than what's been talked about, and I feel we've vetted the design a number of times. I think we expressed concerns about certain aspects of the design a number of times, and we are where we are now. I don't know if we're in a position to reopen any of that. I think the number is the biggest concern, and I think we're at a point now where we've got what we've got, and we've got to figure out how to make it happen for as little money as possible. Unless I'm going to be scrapping everything and starting over again. And I do think there's competition for dollars, and that has not changed either. That's been a conversation we've had for a couple go-arounds.
When you say competition, do you mean competition within town projects? Competing for whatever financing we can come up with? Or are you talking about competition in the marketplace?
No, I'm talking about town projects.
Right.
And we're all aware of that.
And just to be clear, Susan, you're talking about competition for excluded debt.
Correct.
Yeah.
Large projects.
Okay.
Some, that we're aware of now and some that we know are on the horizon,
Right.
relatively immediate horizon.
Okay.
Just to then pick up where Susan opened, I'm concerned that our project costs are $9.5 million more than the $12.5 million that was voted down in 2018. And I took a look at the vote and found that the proposal went down 52% to 48%. So it was not as razor thin a margin as some people have said. If you actually look at the vote tallies, you come up 52-48. So my concern is that this could easily get voted down again, and that raises the question, if it does get voted down, what are your options? What's your plan B? Or are we totally married to this one and only proposal at this particular price point? That's my first question. A follow-up question would be, wouldn't it be prudent to have some options for eliminating some of the programs that you have added since 2018? And while I'm not that familiar with all the programs, I have heard about a TV studio, which I'm told is by quote unquote contract. But that to me is a program ad that adds, I assume, additional square footage. We have additional space around the town for meetings, which we use successfully. I have noticed that our town manager has added staff. I wonder, is that trend going to continue into the future of continually adding more and more staff? Or can that trend, which seems to be a growth trend, be brought to neutral, if not reversed, and so take advantage of the seats that are there? And so I come up with the comment that I made with Michelle when we were talking about fields and courts, and that is, what might the minimum viable project design look like? Now, asking that question at this time where you're trying to get to annual town meeting with an actual number, with an actual project, seems to be not a helpful suggestion, but boy, it just jumps to my mind. How can we do this in light of all the other competing projects? What can we do to make all of those competitive projects reduce their asks down to try and do as much as we can for as many people as we can? Finally, for Michelle or for Chris Senior, I don't know if Chris is on, but what are the town's new growth forecasts now in light of the real estate slowdown, which seems to be, I won't even go there. I won't say anything seems or might or could. We know that there's a real estate business slowdown. What does that do to our growth forecasts and our ability to collect revenue? Then there's many other questions I have that need to be asked later for CPC funding, debt service, and so forth. So those are my thoughts at this point. Having said all that, I feel for each and every one of you on the Town Hall Building Committee for all of the time, the effort, and the thought and the brilliance you've brought to trying to figure this all out. But our job here on capital budget is to make sure that the town is spending its money as carefully as we can to make it go as far as we can for everyone that has a project or or needs resources from the town to make life for everybody better. So I'll leave it at that.
So I can't speak to the trending headcounts and staffing within town hall, but some of the things we can speak to is that, you know, during the process, we looked at many other value engineering options. And the value engineering options were not the value engineering number that we were showing in the slide deck tonight. Those value engineering options are, you know, having to do with interior details, foundation, facade details, and how it presents itself. We went through heavy duty value engineering options earlier in the process, where we looked at reusing the existing foundation of the annex, creating multiple levels, even 3 possible levels of the new addition, reducing the footprint of the new addition, populating the basement of the new addition, and adding areaways for natural light. We went through multiple options of value engineering to make the building smaller. And every time we went through to make the building smaller, the end conclusion that we came up with, yeah, it's a little bit cheaper, but at the consequences that we are seeing, it is not worth it. It is pennies compared to what the project is. And we can, you know, yes, there is a certain level of frustration from committee members, as this is the probably, I don't know, I guess 4th round of this topic in town hall, and it's in the town, and it's always too expensive. And even if we came in at $2 million less than we're presenting now, it still would have been too expensive. So again, it's we designed to the need. We went through multiple exercises to try and find ways to reduce the cost, and this continues to be the conclusion that we come to. Again, if we were to build a slightly smaller building here at this juncture, we still have to redesign that building. So there's still additional costs that are going to be incurred that aren't necessarily going to be offset. So, you know, and as to the renovation options here, we don't see a lot of sense in renovating and putting a large amount of money into something that doesn't meet the needs.
Thank you.
Michael, I'm going to, and Mark, just pardon me, I'm going to just interject for a moment, because I do want to echo what Mark has said with regards to trying to design the building smaller. I went after this very aggressively, you know, with the town hall building committee about 2 years ago, when, you know, the initial estimate came in the 14s, and we were, you know, psychologically still working with a smaller number. That was the first time we had an estimate on the building, this building, as it's largely as it's drawn today, and made comments that were very similar to the ones that you just made, Michael, and really forced an exercise to see if we could, in fact, take square footage out of the building. And it became both clumsy from a functional perspective, a little bit ugly from an aesthetic perspective, and frankly didn't yield the dollar savings that, you know, that I was pushing to achieve. And a large part of that is, you know, you can take square footage out, but you're not taking out, by taking out just what I'll call commodity square footage, you're not taking out necessarily the major cost drivers of the overall project. There are things in the building that are really expensive per square foot, and there are things in the building that are not really expensive per square foot. And just like raw office space is probably the least expensive part of the building per square foot. It's, you know, it's the stairwells, it's the elevator, it's the, you know, it's all the HVAC systems. A couple of more runs to a couple of more rooms doesn't necessarily drive the cost of those systems. So, you know, we did this exercise, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, Mark, Phil, I think we might have gotten $500,000 or $600,000 out of it, but we took out like 2,000 square feet. So, you know, the square feet we were giving up on a dollar per square foot basis were, you know, we're a tiny fraction of what we were paying for the square feet that remained. So it just seemed, you know, I concurred with this at the time, and I concur with it now. It felt counterproductive, but I chased this hard. Yeah, it's really more what's happened since that, you know, that 14 and change quote that's got my head spinning. It's just a perception, neither here nor there in terms of your comment, Michael. I want to just let you know that I was sort of went through that exercise.
Thank you.
And just to add, you know, one design element, one design cue here, because we are focusing on the numbers, but one update to the design that is still in progress of being inked on paper here is we modified the committee approved, when we're still waiting on the designer to finalize the drawing, but enlarging the concession area in the entryway of Old Town Hall. Right now, the wall comes in and then it jogs over at an angle, and we were just going to square up that room a little bit more and create not any kind of commercial kitchen, but just a little catering kitchen with a sink and some warming, some spaces for some warming equipment. That way, the auditorium space could be utilized in a way that similar to what happens over at the Lightkeeper's house, and even possibly generate some revenue, not nearly revenue to offset the cost of the project, but something to, you know, provide value in the town for all the adjacent churches, the numerous weddings that happen in town. So trying to encourage the use of that auditorium space, because as we can see, it lacks a lot in its current state. You know, the lighting in there is subpar, the acoustics are subpar. So our design does address those. It may not solve them completely because it is an existing space, and we're preserving it. We're not gutting it with and putting up acoustical plaster everywhere. So we're putting some treatments up to help combat it. But that's the one design cue thing that has been, which was actually, it's the slight add for that little bit of work in that concession area is included in that value engineering number, that negative number that was in the slide deck. It was a slight positive within that number, but it is still included and accounted for in our estimate.
Anyone else? I have a couple more specific questions that may border on tedious, but I don't want to.
Yeah, I'll make only one observation out of all of this, and maybe it leverages off what Susan was thinking, and that is that this is one of at least 3 or 4 major projects the town is considering, all of which will require excluded debt. Maybe this is more for Gene than for anybody else on this call, but at some point, someone has to say honestly to the public and Cohasset that we're going to do some portion of all of these things. We're going to do fields. We're probably going to do something about a police station. We're probably going to do something about middle high school. We're going to do something about a town hall, and there may be some things I've forgotten. And the total cost of those, someone has to say, what is this all going to be in terms of the increase in people's taxes? And it is substantial. They will be shocked when they hear it. But at some point, somebody has to say what it is and not bring anything piecemeal before a town meeting without being fully honest about what is actually confronting the town in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And it can't be override after override after override. That is completely unacceptable, I think, to most people, but one needs to be honest about what it is we're really talking about. And you're just a piece of it, but it's a huge piece. And a lot of people will look at it and say, do we really need, for the population, for an office building, do we need this kind of spending, or would we rather put it into a school or field or something, some other thing? Anyway, it's a comment, but it's a reality, and that's how people will look at it. And at some point, someone has to address this honestly and fairly, and everybody has to be, people who have to vote for these things have to know what they're confronting. That's all I can tell you. So.
Michael, Susan? Any questions, any further questions, comments? I mean, I have a few detailed items I'd like to ask, but I don't want to.
I will have more questions when we get to the actual financing ideas.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask just a couple of detailed questions, and this may seem random, but it's not, okay? On the value engineering, I listened in on the one of your discussions recently. I think it was with Select Board. It might have been with CPC. Actually, it was probably Select Board. I listened to both. But I got the sense that the big driver of the cost savings on the value engineering was to actually remove the granite veneer facade from the foundation on the front of the building. First of all, did I hear that correctly? Number one, and number two, what is it they're proposing as an alternative? Because when I look at that building, look, hats off. It's a beautiful building, both inside and out. Okay, I'll say that over and over again. It's a beautiful design, but what is it that we're actually going to be looking at after the value engineering?
Here, do you want to take that one, or did you?
So the base design that we had been working off of, Brian, included granite facade along the concrete foundation, and so that was something that we had been assuming as our base case. The value engineering option that was presented by Commodore recommended that we turn that into an add-on. So the bids would be solicited basically two ways. One would be with and without the granite facade. The granite prices were higher than what we had hoped they were going to be. So this was a way of saving, frankly, a few $100,000 on the project. And so that was one of the pieces that we elected to basically deduct from that piece. And so the base case now is no granite. It would be concrete, and that would be the facade. There wouldn't be sort of the covering up. So it would be in contrast to what we have on the historic building.
Okay, and in my recollection, I don't know if I got this right, but something in my head was 400 to the 600 was roughly that. Is that about right? Okay,
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, not sure how I feel about looking at the concrete, but okay, I just want to make sure I understand it first and foremost. The other three questions really fall into making sure that our architect and our OPM have actually paid close attention to the work that was done by the prior committee and are not missing any of that. And there's a reason I'm asking that it specifically focused on this, but what specifically is there? So three parts. Number one, what specifically is their plan with regards to the structural issue that exists up in the in the roof structure of Old Town Hall? And is it in this? Is it in this project? Most importantly,
I'd have to go back and double check, Brian. I don't have that answer right now.
Okay, so somewhere up there's a cracked structural member, and I just don't want anyone, including you guys, to ever hear about this as a change order or a condition that wasn't contemplated. I mean, it's in the reports from the last town hall project. Okay, the same question about the floor in Old Town Hall. If you read those old reports, it's been 5 years since I looked at them, but I promise it's in there. The report states that the existing Old Town Hall floor substructure is sufficient for small group gatherings, but not sufficient for large group gatherings. So in the last go around on this project, there was, it was $250,000 worth of substructure work that was being done under Old Town Hall. to actually make it suitable for large group gatherings. You know, again, this is, you know, this is not something that should be coming up later on as a price increase. And I just want to make sure the architects and the project manager have actually read the reports and included this in the scope of what they're speccing, pricing, and bidding. And the last question is what exactly is the plan with regards to the walls and windows in Old Town Hall? I know there was some discussion about, you know, maybe going with really good, historically accurate, albeit modern, functional, high performance windows, versus, you know, leaving what's there. And the same with the walls. There's discussion about, do we add insulation or do we, you know, not add insulation, considering the windows have no bar value anyway. I'm just curious where we ended up. I mean, are we actually upgrading the performance of the envelope, or are we not?
So we've got upgrading of the windows with a replacement style window, which would fit in the existing openings.
Okay.
So that it's a replacement style window, and there's an add alternate in there in the bid to redo the windows that are there. That would be a more expensive option to redo the windows that were there versus providing a replacement style window. So that's in relation to the windows. The insulation in the wall cavity is going to remain as is. It's a preservation, not a gut renovation of that building. So the interior walls would not be gutted down to the studs. The facade would be repaired as needed, but it is not a full demo and replacement of either the interior or the exterior.
Okay.
And with the you just got to be careful with, you know, it's a building that's has been breathing for years. It continues to breathe. You just got to be very careful not to impact its ability to breathe and have moisture condense in the wall cavity. It's certainly not something that would be designed now, but it's, you know, again, it functionally works. It doesn't condense. So that's the top concern there.
Okay. All right, that's helpful, Mark. Thank you. That's my last question is your project manager and your designer costs, are they fixed in the sense that they, you know, have been fixed and will remain fixed throughout the course of the project, or are they, you know, fixed dollar amount, that is, or are they a percentage, and have they grown with this, you know, the dollar value of the project?
They're a fixed value.
Okay.
Providing there's no changes in ad services scope.
Okay. And this is my last question. Given that we're at risk, you know, with a CM at risk structure, I guess it's a request more than a question. I just respectfully request that you guys really think hard about how we make sure that our contracts with the OPM and the architect cover us in the event that they forget something in their drawings, right? I mean, we're hiring them to draw and deliver a whole building. So let's just say hypothetically they're, you know, their specs forget doorknobs and they go out to bid, and, you know, lo and behold, we finish the building and there are no doorknobs because they weren't in the bid, right? I mean, that's an architect's error and omission claim. That's not, you know, that's not a change order. So I just respectfully ask that, you know, we given that we're at risk and this is not a fixed price project, that we make sure that those types of things actually end up with the correct payers, being not us. It's, you know, it's largely a contract issue when you ink whatever it is you ink before you go forward, presuming that that's, you know, that we find a way to yes on this, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, in terms of the buyout, the risk is on the buyout side. providing everything beyond the drawings is the contractor's, the CM's responsibility. That's where the GMP comes in. Their guaranteed maximum price.
Yeah.
You know, if for some reason, like you said, the doorknobs are missing, and the
So-
doorknobs are
something's-
missing,
Well-
it's then up to us to pursue if we want to go after their errors and omissions. You know,
Well, look, I mean, that's why
That's-
E&O exists, right?
it's an option, but you know, again, it's hopefully that's not what we're talking about here. So
Trust me, they will miss something. I
naturally, something will be missed.
Yes,
I mean,
something will be
it's-
missed.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of details, there's a lot of, you know, but that's not to say that unforeseen circumstances aren't in there either. So,
That's true too. That's all I've got. Anyone else? All right, the time is 7:08. We're roughly on schedule. But absent any further questions or discussion, I think we've probably pushed this as far as we can for one night. Gentlemen, when do you think you'll actually have numbers back from, and in what form will we start to see numbers?
so right now we're in the stage of just pre-qualifying all the subcontractors. So the documents are going out right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be very close to town meeting. It's we're not going to have a large review time to socialize and revisit this once we have the updated number. It's going to be pretty tight to town meeting. The exact date I can't, but I'll have to dig into that. You know, we'll have to dig into it as a group here, but yeah, there's a philosophy and a logic to it being as tight to town meeting as we noted.
That being that the numbers are good for just a short period of time.
Correct.
Okay, and refresh my memory, what is that period of time? Is it 60 days?
So it depends. It varies by trade, but yeah, so some will qualify it. You know, the idea is 60 days.
Okay,
It's in the realm of 30 to 60.
yeah. Okay. All right, well, town meeting is 60 days away. It would be nice to have that number today, but I guess we have to wait.
Well, we're also going to contend with the fact that after a town meeting,
Yeah,
it's going to have to go to a ballot vote in June.
oh, that's true.
So even if it passes on town meeting floor, you know, we still have to contend with a June date, which, you know, as a process for any project of this caliber, it's just a logistical challenge to get those two to line up together
Right.
in a manner that that allows it to actually get voted on in both forums.
Okay.
One quick question, guys. When are we ever going to see actual design drawings, and when will they be posted? So we might look at this design, not just renderings, but real design.
They're on our page
Are they? Okay.
Yep. on the town's website. I will say that the drawing set that, you know, the changes that we talked about with that concession area with that's not up there yet. That's still being drawn right now, but the 95% set's up there.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the set that'll be going out will be a bid set.
You know, I don't want to color any committee members that are going to go look at those drawings, but I encourage you to do so and think about them in the context of what we saw in the last go round. It's a very, very simple and efficient design on the inside. Size and cost aside, it's like, you know, having spent a lot of time with it, it's just a very effective design relative to what we're frustrated with historically.
Mhm.
Very different architect, very different school of thought. All right. Is there anything further? And if not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Phil,
moved.
did you have something?
No,
Okay.
I'm just getting ready to say thank you for having us and letting us express what we have in front of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
But Mike, you make a good point. I mean, if there's anything, you know, Garrett and Phil and Mark that you guys want to ask us, feel now's the time to do it. You know, I'm sure we'll be back, you know, we'll be back in this forum sometime very soon, but I don't want to cut it short without giving you guys free forum as well.
No, I guess my one question would be, you know, I mean, it kind of relates to all the items that come up in town, and you know, the various asks that are being requested now or even in the future. But you know, there's some sizable things there, and you know, really having a funding mechanism in place to deal with these capital projects that are of this magnitude, regardless of what it is, you know, before it's even designed. And I'm not speaking for us as a committee. This is more of my own point of view, because we get into these positions and we see what something costs, and we don't have the ability to swallow that and accept that it is what it is, and that it's costing what it's costing. You know, I mean, I'm sure people are looking at this and go, boy, I really wish we did this town hall a number of years ago, because now we wouldn't be in this position. And likely that if this doesn't go through, it could be said 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Yeah. But you know, it's really having funding in place prior to getting to this point. You know, I mean, it's like we're buying a car and we're not saving $1 for it, and we're going to buy it with no money down, and when we're
That's
financing the entire thing, and we get and who does that? People that get them into financial trouble. So it's you know, we're in the position we're in, but we've got a bunch of asks in front of us. But I think it's something that's, you know, this topic has been out there for a number of years, and you know, there has not been a whole lot of money that's been appropriated and set aside for this cause, regardless of what the design is. And
Agreed.
we keep getting into these positions, and it becomes a circular reference.
And to boot, there's no money, serious money set aside to maintain the buildings. And so they deteriorate because they're not being maintained, including the historic town hall. So those are two major elements that we have advocated with the town manager and his operating budget to make sure to ask for maintenance, if not some kind of future funding for major projects, and cutting back on some of the operating expenses. I'll leave it at that.
I totally agree with both points. The only thing I'd add, Mark, is that as we sort of sit here today and you share that very accurate observation, it goes a long way to explaining why, frankly, we're so intense on the funding steps at the front end of these processes, you know, including feasibility studies and design drawings, because, you know, you have to be serious about actually doing the project when you know, after you go down that path. And inevitably the numbers are bigger than when we started. They always are. People get upset with us when we say that at the front end. But it's always the case. And we really shouldn't be spending money on studies that, you know, or the first steps in projects if we don't intend to finish them. So that's sort of part of the method behind the madness that some people feel when they come to see us at the front end of a new idea.
Would you like a motion to adjourn?
If everyone's set for one night, I think the timing is appropriate. Please, Mike.
Okay, so I'll move that we adjourn.
Great. Do I have a second?
Second,
Great. Let's roll call vote. Ralph Dormitzer? Ah, you're on mute, Ralph.
Ralph Dormitzer, aye.
Michael Dick?
Mike Dick, aye.
Susan Franklin?
Susan Franklin, I.
Brian Host, aye. And the time is 7:18 PM.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
thanks.
More-
Good night.
Phil, Garrett, thank you for your patience with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Appreciate the design
Yep,
that's in front of
appreciate
us.
your feedback. Yeah, thanks.